Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're the last session before you all get to eat again. But we're going to give you some rich food from this session as we talk about being next up in your consideration for boards. How many of you all think you want to be on a board someday?
I'm good. Oh.
Okay, good. So this is the discussion for this group. So it is my pleasure. My name is Kimberly Blackwell. I am the CEO and founder of PMM Agency, and we're an omni-channel firm that represents Fortune 100 companies. Very proud that our client of 15 years nationwide, who is on your side, is the title sponsor for this convening. Black Enterprise has been a great partner with Nationwide for over a decade, and so thank you, Nationwide. I also want to make sure that I acknowledge, well, thank you, okay. I want to make sure that I acknowledge Butch Graves, who I consider to be a dear friend, and thanking him for having me today to moderate a rich discussion. Derek Dingle, who is in the back, and we know all the great work that Derek does in preparing these conversations. And Elisa Gomes, I'm not sure if Elisa is with us. I think it's important that we celebrate. Oh, she is. Okay, there we are. Women supporting women. And if you're wondering about all the great programming that you all are receiving, you all saw her last night doing her thing. We want to make sure that you all recognize Elisa as well. So let's give Elisa a round of applause. Okay, so I asked by a show of hands who all wants to be on a corporate board. So just about all of them go up. I have the distinct honor and privilege of being a corporate director, a company by the name of WAG. It's in the pet services industry. Oh, I see y'all nodding your head. Any of y'all use our services, WAG? Dog walking services, things of the sort. And so with that, we have Adreinne Trimble, who is with us, and she's on our far end. And Adreinne is the SVP and Inclusion Officer for Visa. And then we have Rose McKinney, who is with us also, who actually, let's give Rose a round of applause because she sits on the MGM board, and we are here today as it relates to Rose McKinney-James as well and the great fine staff at MGM. So what we thought we would do in preparation is that we kind of are in different journeys around board. And, you know, Rose and I were speaking earlier, and she's been on MGM's board since 2005? Correct. 2005, right? So she's been in this game for a minute. I'm a newbie. My first corporate board was 2022, so I am 3 years in and have some things to share. And my dear friend Adreinne is on the journey as a C-suite officer of a global corporation, and she will be a board director as well. Ladies, I'll start with you, Adreinne. Why do you want to be on the board? Because I think that's an important question.
That is an important question. Because you're right, you know, we all know that there are financial gains from being on the board, but that's not the driver for me. The driver is because as you ascend through corporate America, you start seeing where the true governance of the organization comes from. And it comes from that board of directors that the CEO is reporting into. So for me, I want to be a part of that decision-making process as I think about the next level of my career. Because as you start thinking about retirement, you know, many of us who start reaching that age, you don't really look to completely retire. It's like, how do you take all the skills and expertise that you've gathered over the years and parlay that into the next journey for you? And for me, I think that would be, you know, a great way to leverage all my skills, all of my qualifications, and bring that different perspective to the boardroom. I received a study from, many of you may know Jim Lowry. Mm-hmm. He sent a study out back in 2020, or maybe 2021, the Stanford University had done. And it was a pictorial of all of the Fortune 100 companies and their boards of directors. And when I looked at that, I think I'll count it maybe on less than one hand how many people looked like me. Mm-hmm. So that lets me know there is an opportunity for my voice to be heard in those rooms with the experiences that I could bring.
Yeah. Rose, you know, dialing back, what was it that made you feel as though you wanted to serve?
Well, I'm sort of the non-traditional director because I came from public service, having been a utility commissioner, a cabinet secretary, wasn't in an operational role like you. My thought was, when an opportunity presents itself, you position yourself to say yes. And I said yes because I've had an opportunity to serve in other leadership positions on nonprofit boards, where you learn, I think, sort of the dynamic of board service. But the thought of actually being elevated to a position that provided me with the opportunity to be actively involved in the oversight of a substantial organization was very attractive to me. And I just wanted to take up the challenge.
Yeah. I'll share with you all, and Elisa and team, they know me, so we're going straight talk. And we will open this up. We actually are going to give you all a little bit more time than maybe some of the other session for questions. For me, to your point, Rose, I was a non-traditional candidate before George Floyd. Most often, as you will find, corporate board searches and those who engage firms, they were looking for CEOs, CFOs, and COOs. CEOs, CFOs, and COOs. I've owned my own business for 25 years. So often, I wouldn't hit the radar for a candidate, a list of candidates for boards. For me, my board service kind of answer to the question was, I didn't know if I wanted to be on a board or not, and I'll tell you why. I spoke with a corporate director who told me, Kim, it's overrated. So I always ask the question because I think it's important that you figure out what it is that you want a corporate, or we'll talk about too, and Rose, I know you mentioned this in prep, and I think it's also important, the different types of boards. Because not everybody wants or needs to be on a publicly traded board company. We sit on publicly traded board companies. There's a whole different kind of playing field that comes with shareholders and things of that sort versus a private company board. But I think ultimately you have to be one who is willing to serve in a sense of understanding fiduciary and governance practices. So before you get on the board, Adreinne, you are in that process now. What are you doing to prepare yourself for your first board?
So a couple of things. The first is there are a lot of different programs out there that you can lean into that will help with that preparation. I call it like a master class almost in terms of understanding the governance, the fiduciary responsibilities that are required. So I went through a program through the Herndon Institute that was very helpful for me, and it was the first cohort that was actually designed in conjunction with NASDAQ. So NASDAQ, that's when they were putting in place the proposal to have more accountability for companies to have more diversity in their boardrooms. So going through a program like that was really helpful. What I would say, the second thing that's been extremely helpful is leveraging your network, my network, because as I was going through this journey, what I found is that most of these board seats come through referrals. They come from people recommending you. And so you have to let people know that this is something that you're interested in, so they're thinking about you in that way. And then secondly, you have to get in those rooms where those decisions are made. Just a short story, Accenture had a gathering for potential board directors, and we were in this room, and we were just talking about our skills and our backgrounds. And one person who is over governance, over the nominating committee for a board, he actually looked at my background. He said, I would never select you for a board position. I was like, what? Who? Me? And so, because he didn't understand, he was just looking at what he saw at the surface. He didn't see all the skills that I had acquired over time. So that's why I started thinking it's really important to kind of brand yourself so that people know that you have these skills and these qualifications that are complementary to board types of positions. And then the third thing I think is really important is, again, leveraging that network, but connecting with those who are the decision makers, getting in rooms with CEOs that are helping to make those referrals on your behalf. So those are the things that have been extremely helpful for me. I just think, right now EOC is going on. For those of you who don't know, there's an EOC winter meeting that's taking place. And a dear friend of ours, Ron Parker, I ran into him last year at this time at the EOC winter meeting, and we talked about what's that next journey look like. And he has started already mentoring me and trying to coach me in that direction. It's those types of relationships that make the difference.
They're critical. Can I just pull
Absolutely.
that thread a little bit? Because if you want to be on a board, you have to make sure that people know that you want to be on a board. Aspiring to be on a board does require some work. And to Adrienne's point, networking is critical to that. Relationships are so important, but it has to be strategic networking. You can't just go to every event or seek out just a handful of folks. You have to really be thoughtful about what board you want to be on, whether or not you want it to be in the industry where you have your subject matter expertise, or whether or not you're willing to take a risk and step outside of your current career experience and take those skills to a different type of an organization. But the first thing you need to do is to think thoughtfully and strategically about what you're looking for on a board. The other thread I want to pull is this point of recommendations and referrals. Better than 70% of board seats are filled by people who know other people on the boards. The search firms, to Kim's point, are looking for people typically with operational experience as a chief financial officer. They love CEOs, especially retired CEOs, because they understand that they're looking for somebody who understands the depth and breadth of the business. So you have to find a pathway, whether or not it's through a formal program like you attended, or through the strategic networking that I'm referencing, to set yourself apart and to help amplify the skills that you have so that they can see a fit. Understand the structure. Are you going to be good for the audit committee, the nomination and governance committee? Do you have skills around risk? You have to almost compartmentalize your skill sets so that you create, I think, a vision for those who are thinking about those appointments.
So you both said a lot, and I want to pull the thread even further, right? One, I want to double down on a point that Adreinne made in the readiness. I, during pandemic, did the Harvard board readiness program. They didn't pay me, but I highly recommend it. I thought that what it gave me was an understanding of the types of matters that are discussed. But it also put us, their method of teaching was a lot of case studies. And so there were publicly traded company matters, privately held, family-owned businesses. There are a lot of different ways to get in, but there is a lot that comes with it. So I do think the readiness does kind of give you a sneak peek and learning into what you might expect, but also had some anecdotal kind of gems. One of which for me was, when it came down to my readiness process, was to understand that when you commit to a board seat, you are committed to that group as a collective. So some go down on that board, you need to know that you are comfortable with the group that sits as a collective in representing that company's interests. The other thing, though, I kind of wanted to go back to you, Rose, your first board. How'd you get it?
Okay, so it is a bit of a unique story. I got my first board after losing a race for lieutenant governor for the state. I was in the midst of drowning in my failure, and I just got a call from the CEO of a large gaming company asking me to come in. He decided that based on the visibility, the way that I'd run the race, he wanted me to be a part of his organization. It's a really unique story, I understand that. But I think the underlying note here is that I clearly expressed an interest in public service. You don't run statewide if you're not willing to put yourself out there. It was also a public vetting. There was nothing about me that that CEO didn't know. And it gave me a pause initially when he called, because I hadn't been through a readiness program. I'd led large organizations, I demonstrated some leadership, but I didn't have the underpinning corporate experience. And so I was really nervous. And I was going to say no because of the Peter principle. I'm just not going to do this. But that inner voice said, this is the time to say yes. This was the time to say yes, and it was probably one of the best decisions I've ever made. I can't say that that first board meeting wasn't a complete, I was just destroyed by nerves. I had no idea what to expect. But you can surprise yourself, because I recognize that even around that table with all of the business leaders that were sitting there, that I actually did have something to contribute, that I did have the experience, that I could make a contribution. And so it's believing in yourself and taking advantage of the opportunity when it presents yourself. That's how I got that first board.
Wow. I'll share mine. It might be as crazy as yours, but Adreinne, I wanted to go back to a point that I also think is important, because she referenced the story and how a gentleman kind of came to her and said, well, you know, I would not have expected you to be looking, but based upon your experience. One of the most powerful tools and assets will be your board bio. And I will tell you that I did another program at Deloitte, and it was Deloitte Corporate Board Readiness for Women. And one of the best things coming out of that program, having met, you know, all types of CEOs that came in and spoke to us, was the development of my board bio. It's different than your resume. It's going to tell a story that speaks to you by way of you being a change agent and what value you present or have presented in your various roles. It's going to be probably one of your best marketing tools by way of your business brand. And so I would challenge you all to think about, you know, that's the great thing about ChatGPT now, looking up things. Go look up board bios and maybe put in an exercise that has you to reframe your narrative and how you think about that by way of business. Absolutely.
I think it's, because that's a really good point. Because when that gentleman made that comment, he was looking at where I was sitting currently. And at that time, I was the president of the National Minority Supplier Development Council. But what he didn't know is that I had 20 years working in Toyota in a variety of operational roles and had all this other experience. And I took the role at NMSDC because I wanted to get more organizational and P&L type of responsibilities. So to me, that's how you start telling the story. How do you market yourself? How does that board bio really read, which, to your point, is different than a traditional resume?
Yeah.
You got to make sure you're telling the story and highlighting those skills.
It is not the chronology of your life or in your career, but it is more importantly what you bring to the organization, what do you bring to the board, what are your skills, how have you advanced your work. And again, that fit, because boards have a structure. It's pretty traditional. There may be some differences in terms of the committees, because boards do have committees. But the reality is that your skill sets are going to fit pretty comfortably within one of those committees. So if you're in finance, or you've worked with a financial institution, or if you are someone who's had significant experience with corporate governance, then you want to be on the GovNom committee. There are a variety of pathways to achieving it, but you just have to think about what the structure is going in. And that board bio is what will distinguish you. And even the wording of the board bio becomes incredibly important. Talk about ChatGPT, they look for certain words. And if those words aren't there, then no matter how hard you've worked on it, it's just an exercise.
I want to go back, and I'm not going to give you all of it, but I will tell you the key points I want you to take away and how I got my first board. One, I had been told no several times before I got my first board. So I think it's important that you realize that it's going to be a journey and probably not a sprint to your first board, right? But with that said, we are here at the Black Enterprise Women of Power Summit. I look across the room and I'm inspired by all of the faces and talent that I see in the audience. But I got my first board actually having attended a 50-person summit that was primarily women who did not look like me. And I was a speaker on a panel. I did a presentation. After I finished, a woman who was the co-founder of Care.com as its CEO came and spoke to me afterwards. We talked for 90 minutes. I spoke up in saying that I was interested in a board position. Within 6 months, I had my board. I say that to you also in the fact, and remember I'm an entrepreneur, I tell folks I eat what I kill and every day I'm hunting. But I took that same approach with how I was going to look at being on a board. And closed mouths don't get fed. So you need to make sure that you are, because people would make an assumption about me and say, oh, she runs her own business. I'm in deal flow, so I do a lot of other things by way of ventures as an LP and GP. She's not looking for a board seat, she good, right? But I was, because I felt as though, to the points made, I, as a contributor and wanting to help companies become better in the interests of their stakeholders and shareholders, felt like that was something else that I was interested in. So I challenge you to make sure that you are looking in unconventional or non-traditional audience and networks, because that's where your first board might be. That said, I kind of want to go back to the other point that you all mentioned. In the board bio, in the representation of past experiences, the skills, and how you frame that by way of to what you acknowledge, Rose. They're looking for impact. They're looking for what I call the value chain and where you fit within. Were you all prior, and Adreinne, in your case, as you're on this journey, serving on nonprofit boards? I think because some people will say, well, do I have to be on a board? And I do think that there's some value and tremendous in the training that you can receive by service in other areas.
I would absolutely agree with that. I've served on a number of nonprofit boards. I've served as a chair of nonprofit boards to get that kind of experience, understanding governance, because some of it is similar in terms of you still have fiduciary responsibilities over a nonprofit organization as well. Sometimes even more so because it's a nonprofit organization and you have to be very careful in terms of how you are managing that organization's funds. So that was one way that was very helpful. I've also served in advisory committee, advisory roles that's been also helpful, kind of a precursor to serving on a board. One of those has been with a private equity firm, and serving as an advisor in that capacity, because it gives you, again, that connection to other people, and it's expanding the network of those folks who know that I'm looking for that first board opportunity. So by serving in these other kinds of capacities, it broadens my skill set and also broadens my network. So it's serving two paths for me that's been very helpful. And I'm with you. My board seat is coming.
That's right.
The other piece I would say, though, is that while you are still sitting in corporate America, you have to make sure that your company is going to support you being on a corporate board. And that's another hurdle that people don't think about.
Yeah.
So while you're out here branding yourself, positioning yourself, expanding your network, you have to make sure you have the support of your company, too, that they will actually allow you, especially if you're sitting in a key role.
So before we go further, clearly you've checked and Visa is cool with you serving on the board, right?
Yes.
Because here's what I'll tell you too. Prior to the reckoning and George Floyd and folks taking a different kind of lens in attracting more diverse representation on boards. To your point, many companies would not let officers of the C-suite serve at all. So this is fairly new. There were some companies, especially in the financial services area, because folks feel like and professional services. So like if you work for Accenture, I have buddies who are in it, they cannot, serve on a corporate board. So I think it is important that you understand, nobody's telling y'all go quit your jobs, but I think it is important for you to understand the landscape and culture of governance within your own organization and where that support might lie. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, so two things. Going back to the nonprofit conversation, the other value is in understanding the dynamic of what happens in a boardroom conversation. Because it is a collegial environment, it's a collective decision-making process where information is gathered and discussed and major decisions are made, particularly around the strategic direction of a company. So if you've spent time in a nonprofit boardroom, and to your point, Adreinne, where there is what I'd call additional fiduciary responsibilities when it comes to managing the allocation of those resources, you then have an understanding of what that dynamic is. You understand how to interact with the leadership. There's typically a chair. You know who the treasurer is. You know the structure. And so there's no question when somebody comes to you and says, are you interested in a corporate board or a private board? Because I think it's important to think about that as a pathway as well.
What would you say are the differences? Because I think that's important to talk about, and the differences between private and public.
Well, there are many differences, but a publicly traded board is highly regulated and is required to meet a range of requirements in terms of reporting and disclosure, et cetera. On the private side, you don't have that significant regulatory intervention. It is driven primarily by whoever owns the company. And so while public companies have a requirement to meet the needs of shareholders and what I call the broader stakeholder consideration, because I'm very big on the need to not just limit yourself to shareholder interest, but to make sure that you're thinking about the other stakeholders involved, the communities where you conduct business, your employees. Those are all stakeholders who are very important and who should be factored into major strategic decisions. But those are the major differences that I can speak to.
Yeah. Go back to the power, because I think a lot of it's important, Rose, I'm going to come to you first in selecting a board. Because, you could get a call tomorrow and say, we want you on the board. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's the board for you. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important that we talk about that process and even the power of the candidate and the interview. So what would you say and impart in the audience around considerations they may make?
Well, it's definitely a two-way street. I think we heard earlier that it's important, as important it is for you to be prepared to be interviewed, you ought to be interviewing as well. And prior to the interview, there should be a significant amount of due diligence. Especially for publicly traded companies, there's a lot of information that's available that allows you to make a decision. Most boards, through their nom-gov committees, put together a skills matrix. They want to know that they have people within the board who have very specific, whether or not it's finance or IT or governance broadly, they need to know what your skills are, and they want some balance. I also think it's important to have geographic balance. It kind of depends on the nature of the company, but you do need to know that that selection is going to be based on who's already in the room, what they need to bring in. Also, from a succession planning standpoint, as people move on, and I am long tenured on a couple of my boards, and hello to Toyota because I'm on the board of the bank. the importance is that the selection process is going to be based on what they need in that space and time, and also looking forward. And so,
Yeah.
I'm thoughtful.
I would add, Kim,
I was just getting ready to come to you. Go ahead.
I actually turned down the first board position I was offered. And as eager as I was to be on a board, I didn't feel it was the right board for me. It was a private company, and that's not why I turned it down, but the structure of the company, how the company was kind of run, it just didn't feel right. It didn't feel like it was a good fit, and they were heavily pursuing me. But to your point, it's a two-way street.
Yes.
And I had to make sure that it worked for me just as it was going to work for them. And I didn't see the reciprocity, so I was like, no, this is, I'm going to have to turn this down, which was tough because we all know that once you get that first seat, it kind of opens up the door for you.
Duh.
So it was really hard to
So
say,
what's that filter? Like if you think now about what it is that, you're considering and the checked boxes for what would make sense for you.
it's the point that Rose made earlier, it's the culture of who's sitting in the room. And I'm okay being the only. I've been the only in the room a lot of times. So that's not the issue. But it's more of, for me, it's what are their values? What's their culture? I'm a chief inclusion officer. I've been doing DEI work for the last 20 years. And if you are pursuing me as a candidate and we aren't having those types of discussions, why do you want me there? What is the intent? So I have to understand, what you're trying to gain by even pursuing me for this to make sure that, again, it's a good fit. So for me, that filter is that culture. It's that the way what the company stands for, what type of deals they're doing. Because, when you're doing your research, you want to understand all those things. And the reputation of the company and the reputation of the CEO. And how their employees feel about the company. I mean, you look for all of those types of things because, to your point you made, if something goes down and you're on that board, you're all accountable for that.
That's right.
And I have to make sure that my brand is going to be able to withstand the long term, and in that case, I didn't think it would.
Yeah. So Rose, okay, looking back, now having served, what would you say might have been, so let me do it two ways, the differences of what you thought sitting on a corporate board would be versus the realities and or lessons and learnings? Because I think that there are some things that we learn immediately.
You do. Well, first off, the mystique, because since few people really understand what happens in the boardroom unless you've been in the boardroom, they typically think that it's something that it is not. It actually is an awful lot of work. There is work to be undertaken. I mentioned the interpersonal dynamics. Adreinne, you talk about being, the only one. I've been the only one. I've been the first. You have to determine when to speak up, how to speak up, but you absolutely have to determine that you will speak up because it becomes really important. Because once you have that seat at the table, I think you're obligated to leverage your experience, your unique voice, and to share that. You have to be careful about navigating the best way to do it, but it needs to be done. So I learned that it's hard work, that personalities can be a challenge, and like any other organization, you have to figure out how to navigate around that. I also learned that there are folks who want to be on a board but aren't prepared to do the work, and so they come unprepared, and as a result, they're not really making the contribution that they should, and it becomes a difficult environment to work in. But you have to work around it, and you have to have the courage as a group to say, this is not working. We need somebody who's actually, has come to work. So those, a handful of things, but.
I had to write mine down. And what I thought about too, what I learned too, and was reminded of, it's a little bit different because most of us are leaders and operators. You get on a corporate board and you're sitting in a governance seat, it's nose in, hands off.
That's right.
So you're not in the weeds the way you would be in your day-to-day operations. So it's leading at a macro level, it's providing point of view to the senior management team. It's very thoughtful questions. If you can develop the skill, and I do it anyway as a consultant to Fortune 500 CEOs, the thoughtful questions and probing and understanding the business. I want to go back because I wrote down a lot of work. It's a lot of work. I'm on the audit committee and Nom and Gov. A lot of work. A lot of work. But you know, I have the muscle where I actually enjoy it. I'm a stretch learner. I don't think I know everything, but I enjoy learning more. And then I'll go out and try to kind of find what it is that I should be maybe understanding better there. So I did the governance versus operational, the thoughts, hands. I had to write mine down. Board etiquette. Board etiquette. Just like there's golf etiquette, there's board etiquette. That board dinner is probably one of the most underestimated convenings of the board meeting. It allows you to get to know your contemporaries in a way in which I think, to the point of being collegial, that's where you develop that relationship. So not missing those kinds of things because you think, oh, it's the dinner, I'll get there later. No, that's probably one of the more important parts of the meeting itself. And then the other point in the sense of just really kind of understanding your power. And I tell folks too, it's not always your volume and how, you know, some people, you know, you all go to the meetings, you know, when you come to the meetings and there's certain people in the meetings, you know they're gonna have something to say. Sometimes silence is golden in where and how you're able to process. But when you use your voice, when you use it, they know that you're getting ready to say something that adds value. And that's something too, that, you know, that's in everyday workplace as well, but especially in the boardroom. I want to go back to the point that you mentioned, Adreinne, in that, you know, there is this whole notion that once you secure your first seat, then others will follow. Have you seen that to be the case?
I have.
Yeah.
I have. And actually, you know, to be completely transparent, it's been a little frustrating because you see some people who are on a number of boards, and then you think, okay, can you pass some of them over to some other people? Can you share the wealth just a little bit? But I have seen that. I've seen that happen with some of my contemporaries, my colleagues, you know, just landed that first board seat. And when recruiters start reaching out to you, that's when the first questions they're asking is, are you already serving on a board in any capacity? And when you have to say no, it's kind of like, ooh, it's kind of like a mark against. So when I'm ready for that time when I can say, yes, I'm serving on the board, and I'm ready for the next one. So, but yes, I have seen that happen where it's kind of opened up the pipeline for other positions to come.
Well, let me say that my second board came as a result of having been on the first board. They specifically asked for new directors who had already been vetted, were either licensed or otherwise. So that's how that happened for me. But the other thing that happens is they are looking for directors with subject matter expertise. I have the privilege of chairing the Corporate Social Responsibility and Sustainability Committee for MGM Resorts. I also chair a committee for one of my other boards, which is a lithium mining company. But they wanted me on the board for my skill set. And so while I recognize that being on multiple boards requires, again, a lot of work, I have the opportunity to sort of take those skills. It's a continuation from a governance standpoint. But I'm also very active in the process of mentoring and making myself available to others who are interested in being on boards. participating in formal programs or just being a part of these conversations. Because I think it's incredibly important for folks to have a real candid understanding about board service. Because I found that there are a lot of folks who want to be on boards who, once faced with the realities of it, say, maybe not. Maybe I want to go in a slightly different direction. Maybe that's what I thought I wanted to do. And I think it's important to have the benefit of that understanding.
One thing, if I could just jump in,
Sure.
that you said, Rose, I think is so important. It's about building that brand as a subject matter expert in a certain area. And mine has been around the ESG. And I think that that's a key point that people need to understand is how are you positioning yourself? How are you building your brand so that you have something that could be of value for those boards that are looking to complement the skills that they already have. So that's where I found it to be valuable to kind of put myself in that position to become that thought leader or that expert in this space so that when I'm ready to provide that type of information or qualifications for boards, then they'll see that, okay, here's the expert. And it's another point that you raised too, it's not always going for the publicly traded companies, but there are a lot of private companies out there that are looking for experts in certain areas. So how, making sure I'm positioning myself for those types of roles as well, because again, it's just getting that experience and that level of opportunity to contribute.
And I would add to that, high growth companies. Looking in industries where there are high growth opportunities. And then I'll also tell you too, there are some boards where the compensation packages are beautiful. You're making $250,000+, you got great stock options, et cetera. There will be others where it may not be that, but there may be a different model to where you get more equity, and so, you need to be open, but also intentional. I think the other thing that Adreinne said was that, I consult to CPG companies, some of the largest in the world. So in understanding customer acquisition models, what it means for business transformation through technology, digitizing, everything now in this AI economy. Those are things that, too, allow me to speak about my contribution differently. I think and we're going to get ready, so if you all want to start coming to the mic for any questions, please do. I think it's important, too, to just kind of make sure that you're reminded, too, that you can be a board member, but you're going to have to put in the work. It is going to be, in some cases, a means of sacrifice. The point I wanted to echo by way of Rose is that, and Adrienne's point, I now have friends who sit on 2 and 3 boards, and I get calls from searches because they don't want any more, but they will give my name as a candidate for the search. So part of reputation by way of delivery, results, how you show up, how you position yourself through governance is where folks will go out and bat for you. And so there are people who are carrying your name into other rooms. But that point that Rose made is that me having now sat on my first board, I got a call the other day from somebody on my board that said, Kim, are you interested in any other boards? Because I have 2 or 3 opportunities I'd like to put you up for. That means that, and that was to me the highest form of compliment, because that means that I'm showing up the way I need to show up as a director to gain the respect by way of reputation and contribution. So I see a line and we're ready. Wow. Give us your name and a question.
Okay. All right, I'm Crystal Hill with Travelers, and you started answering most of my question. I was wondering, like, the benefits of being on a board. So we're talking about packages and stuff.
She wants you to kind of double down more on,
I mean, I think Kim outlined it. It varies. Typically, you receive a retainer. You receive equity. And there's also an expectation that you maintain a certain level of equity in the company, because the thought is you need to have some skin in the game too. So whatever your fees are, there's an expectation that you find a way, either through your own your equity allocation or otherwise, to also invest in the company where you are have the oversight. But it's a retainer if you are a committee chair, or if you are the lead director. That compensation is increased, and it is can be very significant depending on the size of the company.
The other point I wanted to make, and this is important, I lead ESG on my board, but I will tell you, keep international board opportunities open too.
Yes.
Because globally, you know, there are many companies that prioritize ESG. So don't just think domestically as you're making those considerations. Okay.
I know ESG, I'm sorry, I just don't
It's
know what it is.
environment, social, or sustainability, and governance. So it's an area of corporate governance that most boards are actively engaged in, whether or not, I guess environment and sustainability come together. Social impact is what I'd say for the S, which could be any number of things, from philanthropy to the work that you do in your communities. And then governance is how your company is run, your oversight, how you show up, essentially.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. Next.
Yes, hello. I'm Gail Guest-Brown with Guest-Brown Impact. I'm an executive leadership coach in leadership development. I thank you for the expertise on the board that you've given us about board. You talked a little bit about compensation, but what I know from friends, I'm not on a board, that the structure of the compensation depends, it's different, it varies widely, like whether you're on a committee or not. Could you say a little bit about that? And then secondly, you all said you're looking how much work it is to be on a board, and yet you want to be on multiple boards. So how is that working? How does that work? Because I know people who are on 3 and 4 boards. I'm like, how do they do that?
Well, you know, 3 or 4, probably the maximum, depending on what you do on the boards.
Yeah.
If you're a lead director, you have additional responsibilities. If you're a committee chair, you have additional responsibilities. So it's like everything else, it's in balance. I will say that when I started my board work, I was the president of an advertising and public relations firm. I found that I could not manage both. So I ended up doing what she does, but at a much smaller level. So I have my own firm, and I've been out on my own for 22 years so that I had the flexibility to do my board work because I loved it. And so you have to make decisions about and prioritize what you want to do. It's very difficult to do what Adreinne does and to do multiple boards. At some point, and she mentioned it, at retirement, then she has the capacity and the flexibility to do multiple boards.
That makes sense.
I am struggling. I got a lot going on right now, but everything in balance.
The other thing I would add is that you have to look too at when these boards meet, because they're generally quarterly and around the same time. So before you even go into a board conversation, once you're on a board, you have to make sure that the board meetings don't overlap with your current board. And so there's a lot, going back to the work, I mean, it's a lot of reading.
Yes.
A lot of reading. A lot of reading.
Yeah, the board packages look like this.
Yeah, you know, your board packets and again, it's, but I wouldn't trade it because I also think too, as a business leader, you are just continuously growing by way of understanding different industries, different models and the way in which people are adapting and or flexing to solutions. So, you know, there's give and take like there isn't anything else, but you have to be built for it. I will tell you, to Rose's point, I sit with one now, and I'm a founder and CEO of a company, and I have other things on my plate. So I would have to, I would really have, because it's not, here's the other thing, etiquette. You don't just quit a board. That's not the way that works either.
Oh, I see.
You know? And so again, I think there are a lot of things by way of board education that people would naturally assume, oh, you know, Nike called her, she wants to go to the Nike board. That's like one of my aspirational boards. Not couldn't just quit and say, oh no, Nike's calling. There is a process and a protocol to which those things occur as well. The other thing that Adreinne mentioned that I think is important is really understanding that CEO. And I would tell you, like, you know, I was very much drawn to the CEO of WAG, but seats change. So that shouldn't be like how you make the final determination and decision.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Next question, please.
Hi, I'm Charlene Polite-Corley. I'm VP of Diverse Insights and Partnerships at Nielsen.
Okay.
And I wanted to go back to something you've mentioned a few times, which is the commitment to the collective. And we've actually been seeing a lot of board decisions in the headlines in recent weeks. And so I'm curious to your thoughts on, or experience on, whether you, in coming into these rooms, have encountered decisions where you may have disagreed with the collective and how you kind of reconciled that to stand, you know, 10 toes down with the decision. But for some of these headlines, especially around DEI commitments and the culture of these organizations, what skill sets do you think are missing in those rooms that may have corrected course or taken them in a different direction?
I'm gonna let Rose go first. I do have an answer for that, but I'm gonna
Tell
let
it,
Rose
tell
go
it all.
I probably want to hear your answer.
I want to hear both of y'all answers. So.
Well, you mentioned a very key component to the experience, and that is the culture.
Yes.
You also need to focus on values. And as you're doing your due diligence, as you get to know that CEO, and as you are become more familiar with the management team, you get a very keen sense of what the culture of the company is going to be. And I've been very fortunate because the companies where I'm affiliated have very strong cultures that are very balanced and very thoughtful. When it comes to disagreements, they occur. I've had disagreements. I do think you have to be thoughtful in how you present them. But as I said earlier, some things need to be said. If they go unsaid, then the conversation never takes into consideration your perspective. And again, it's important. And I don't always win, but I have seen instances that by speaking up and offering a solution or a path forward, I have given them that opportunity. What's missing in many instances are people who have real world experience. I call it real world. We have a lot of people who are just on it when it comes to business. I mean, they have MBAs from fabulous institutions, but they all think the same way. They problem solve the same way. And so you need to have people in the room who can say, well, did you think about that? Or in my experience, it was that. And I see the opportunity for this audience to participate in that way, because I can assure you, your experiences, your lived experiences, are going to be very different from what you'll find when you move into that boardroom.
Love it, thank you.
And she did such a great job. I'm not going to say too much more, only that your one vote or one voice by way of representation, you're not going to win them all, right? I actually think it's important too in this time and hour for us to recognize that there are boards and companies to where folks are having discussion. In some cases, especially with our leaders where we know their values, we need to give some grace. Because there's also this thing when you sit on a board where nobody sees or knows that you may not necessarily know that you were the voice in the room that raised the thoughtful questions, that was okay with courage and conviction. Because particularly with publicly traded companies, when there's a vote, the corporate hygiene is that generally it's a unanimous vote. But that does not mean that there was not a conversation.
And I would just add, not that I'm on the board, but as I was sharing earlier, the reason why I just declined the board seat that I was offered was for the very reasons that they're talking about. When you start looking at the culture of the company, the management team and how they operate, is it a lot of just adversarial type of relationships? You have to do your due diligence and really understand what you will be stepping into to make sure it's something that you feel that your voice can and would be heard and would add value.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great question.
Hello, my name is Star Granby Collins. I'm a vice president at MasterCard in their Network Standards division. I have a two-part question. And I'm sure you guys have heard of these companies or even schools that are supposed to do trainings to prep you for a board. Do you guys think that those are worth it? And if they are worth it, at what point, right? Because I'm a vice president. That's not really that high. I know you said that typically boards are looking for CEOs, CFOs. So at what point would it be a good investment, or is it never a good investment? It's because I've had people contact me like, hey, you'd be good for a board, and the next thing you know, you want $7,000 from me to go to your class to be prepped for a board. So, thank you.
Again, like I tell you, I can't remember what I paid for Harvard, but I thought it was worth it for me. You know, I think you probably have to ask around, you know, and see what you might be able to find by way of references or, you know, reviews. I would tell you that I immersed myself. When I'm kind of like 0 to 100, like I knew it, but I wanted to be ready. And, you know, understanding that this was a world that I did not know. And as much as my friends and colleagues, contemporaries could tell me, there was still an advantage for me through Deloitte and Harvard to have done those programs. Okay. They were good investments, but they kind of gave me like foundational view. I think it wasn't until I actually got into the seat and that experience is kind of like baptism by fire in a great way. But you know, I would encourage you to be selective. Doesn't mean you have to do all of the programs, you know, but go out and identify where you would think that might make sense given its focus. And I would tell you not to like charge it to no, they're not worth it. I actually, in my experience, it was definitely worth it.
Yeah, I mean, you asked whether or not you should never do it. I would say, to Kim's point, there are a range of opportunities for you. Many of them are sort of designed for the aspirational director, just to give you the basics. So at vice president level, you may want to do that. As you get closer to a senior position where you think you are ready to really jump into it, then you probably want to do something more formal. Of course, by then, you may feel that you have enough experience under your belt where you don't even need it. So I think foundationally, it's really helpful to at least get the basics, because then you don't know what you don't know, right?
And I would add to that,
go ahead.
Someone that went through a structured program like that, similar to what Kim went through, it was more the foundation. And I'm not embarrassed to say, it was helpful because before I went through that process, I didn't know what a 10K was. Mm-hmm. And I learned very easily, very quickly what that was and how important it is. What are proxy statements and why is it so important? All of those things, you know, you don't talk about in your day-to-day jobs inside corporate America, but then when you go through these programs, you learn why these documents are so important. And I was helping to prepare documents for board meetings and didn't know how these documents are going to be used. So for me, it was extremely helpful to put it in context.
The other organization I want to mention is NACD, National Association of Corporate Directors. National Association of Corporate Directors. Yeah. They have a lot of programming for, I believe, non-directors as well. I sit as a member of NACD, but I definitely think, you know, from an educational standpoint, and then the other one, they would kill me for not mentioning them, is Santa Clara University. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the Black Corporate Board Readiness, BCBR, and the Women Corporate Board Readiness. And I literally was exchanging emails with Thane this morning. Thane and Dennis do a phenomenal job. They're on their cohort 13 for their Black Corporate Readiness program. but Santa Clara University is another. The last one I would tell you is that I have a friend who actually I serve on a board with, Jocelyn Mangan. They have a program. It used to be called Him for Her. It's now called Illumyn, ILLUMYN, and they are another one as well.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Cache Covard. I'm Director of Operations at Scan Health Plan, and I've participated on nonprofit boards since 2017, and I aspire to be on a corporate board one day. And thank you for all of the great tips on what we can do now to get there. And Adreinne, I'd like to drill on a point that you made around building your brand recognition and subject matter expertise. Earlier in my career, I'm curious how helpful it'll be to build speakership at conferences or become a thought leader on LinkedIn, especially in this age of social media. How can I use this platform I have now to prepare myself for later?
I would say all of those things would be very helpful, because what you're doing is you're putting your skills, your qualifications, your thought leadership in a public view, and you never know who might see that, who might pick up on that, who might be reading it, who might reshare, or who might comment on your posts, and just getting into that circuit of speaking on your expertise. I think Kim made the point earlier. She was speaking on a panel, participating in a discussion. Someone came up to her afterwards, and that led to her getting, additional opportunities. So all of those things do matter. I would just say be very intentional about what you're going to do, and make sure it's something that's going to help, that's going to build upon the skills you already have, if that's what you're really looking to do going forward. It's been helpful for me, kind of putting my flag in the sand as a DEI thought leader, so that I can parlay that into the ESG capabilities for a board.
Ditto, ditto. Visibility is huge, and you have to elevate your visibility in a strategic way, because you never know who's watching. When I got that call, I'm telling you, it took my breath away. You run for public office, but you never know who's watching you and under what circumstances and through what lens. So be thoughtful.
The other thing I would say, and Adreinne talked about it before, when I think about it, I served in Columbus, Ohio on the Columbus Urban League board, the YWCA board, and the Chamber board, all nonprofit organizations, but I was sitting alongside the CFOs and other C-suite leaders in Columbus, Ohio of Fortune 500 companies. And so to the point that they're making, just the proximity and where and how you show up. In two of those organizations, I was on exec committee. You want to be a leader. You want to show yourself in that value and change by what it is that you want to be collaborative. I think, Rose mentioned just the whole collegial aspects of boards. Just like people do business with people they like, people bring to boards people they like.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Elena Martin. I'm an HR leader at TE Connectivity. I actually had a question very similar to Charlene's earlier, but I wanted to follow up and then maybe ask a second question, if that's okay. Mm-hmm. I wanted to understand how consistent you're seeing boards and organizations with regard to their values. You spoke about that with her answer, but with regards to their values and priorities, how you see them changing, and what are some of the factors and conversations that are taking place when these major shifts on some of these priorities happen. My second question is around, Kimberly, you mentioned that after George Floyd, the profile changed a little bit from the CEO, the CFO, the COO. What does that profile look like now, and is it shifting back because of the conditions that we're in?
Now, see, you know what? Actually, that was a question I was supposed to ask, so thank you for asking. I'm gonna go to you, Rose.
Well,
because I know we talked about, I saw in the prep that came up as it relates to the climate and the difference.
We definitely are in an atmosphere of change. It's continuous change. Most companies are focused on making sure that they maintain a certain reputation. They think about risk and how to deal with those risks. They don't want to be a target of an activist investor or an outside group who could impact their stock values. So those conversations are undertaken very carefully. But when it comes to values, companies that I, again, am fortunate to be affiliated with, stick with the values, because that is the place where you can find consistency. So there's no need to make immediate change, or there are those who are thinking about, I think they're calling it rebranding, some of the work that they've done. They will continue to do it under certain labels, but we are definitely in a time of change. And as far as the profile for directors, for a decision to be made based on the thought that a DEI candidate was responsible for, I mean, to put that out in the atmosphere ought to be an indication of what we're seeing broadly in society, not just in the corporate boardroom. So it's going to be reflected far beyond the conversations that we have amongst ourselves. It's happening, you know, across the landscape. And it is something that we are going to have to deal with deliberately.
What I would say is that I consult, and I'm going now, working harder than ever, and I'm using 4 words to a lot of my C-suite leaders. Strategies change, values don't. Strategies change, values don't. I would also tell you, too, that I am seeing that a lot of my friends and contemporary chief legal officers, procurement officers, it's changing.
Yep.
You know, they are going across the C-suite now and understanding the technical skills, value, and expertise. During COVID, you didn't want a CPO helping you figure out how to get your goods pro, you know? So I am pleased with what I'm seeing by way of the profile. What I'm praying over is that, you know, we will continue to see the representation of diverse leadership, thoughts, perspectives, and talent.
Thank you.
Maybe
And I think,
did you
go
want
ahead, Adreinne.
Oh, no,
Are you good?
I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you for your
They've given me the rap
transparency.
signs, so I know you all want to eat. So thank you very much. We appreciate you all joining us.